"I have decided to grant the request for a new pack," his uncle announced. Ray's stomach dropped. He was fully dressed, jeans and 2 shirts and his parka on top. But he suddenly felt chilled to the bone, and he had to lock his knees to keep himself upright. He had been hoping, he realized. Stupidly, he'd thought. But of course it didn't matter that his uncle was first alpha of their pack. He couldn't give a healthy male omega to a single mate, no matter how much he might have wanted to protect him. In a pack as large as theirs, a split had become inevitable. Many would argue Ray's new status was a direct result of the need for an omega to form a new pack. Once upon a time, when he'd been sure he'd come out of childhood an alpha, Ray had thought of forming a new pack himself. He'd never thought of what an omega might feel at the prospect. As far as he'd been told, omegas in heat needed an alpha to breed with, or they would go out of their mind with lust. But he wasn't in heat, not yet, and arousal was the furthest thing from his mind as he felt the crowd around him stir impatiently, like predators about to jump their prey. His uncle didn't speak the names of the alphas he'd chosen. They must have already known. Ray kept his gaze focused on the wall behind his uncle's left shoulder. It wasn't because he thought he'd be reprimanded if he looked away. He was just too terrified of finding who they were, the men who would get him.
This has been a professional recording by Richard Sawyer of Omega for the Pack by N.J. Lisk. You can buy the audiobook on your usual retailer or the author's website, www.njlisk.com/shop.
Runt of the Litter. A young insecure alpha, an older omega determined to keep his freedom and the injustice neither of them can permit to go on. Part 1. Leo. Runt of the Litter was actually one of the nicest things he got called by his siblings. Sometimes they'd even say fondly instead of mockingly, though Leo didn't appreciate it either way. His dad had made it clear very early on it was not acceptable to make fun of him for being small, so they didn't dare do it at all in front of their parents or older siblings. By now, they didn't seek him out much. They were all grown now, and it didn't even happen that often anymore. When it did, it was more leftover habit than actual aggression. The kind of sibling rivalry that could have meant they trusted each other enough to be rude. But it didn't. It was just true, and it was like a sore place inside him, the knowledge that they thought that of him. They were his litter mates, not twins, but almost as good. They had shared everything from the moment they had come to be, and they had been meant to share everything from then on. They did, the 4 of them. But Leo was too weird, too small, too weak. His older siblings had always been kinder to him than to the rest of his litter. But in a way, the overcompensation had set him apart for his weakness just as much as his age mates' disdain. And for all his dad defended him, he had chosen to start trying the new experimental birth control methods right after the 5 of them had been born. Although Leo blamed him, he'd been teasing off about how he would obviously be an omega, that he was better informed than most about the hardships of pregnancy. Omeganess was the one thing his siblings wouldn't make fun of. But other pack kids who bought on the stupid human ideas that a man being anything like a woman was embarrassing, say often enough that Leo had ended up believing them. He respected his dad. He wouldn't have minded being an omega so much. It wasn't like anyone would look at him twice without pheromones intervening. Leo would have liked being more attractive, instead of just small. 5'7", he barely made it to the average for human standards. Among wolves who regularly reached 6 feet as teenagers, he often felt like a child. He was ready to be a beta forever. Most people were. And to become an omega. It should have come as no surprise when he presented alpha instead. After all, nature had made it clear it liked to screw with him from the moment he had been born.
That was a recording of Runt of the Litter by N.J. Lisk. You can find the book on the author's website at www.njlysk.com/shop. This is a recording of Not to Be Borne by N.J. Lisk.
When 7 presented Omega, some people assumed I should be relieved, since it made it highly unlikely I would. But why the fuck should I feel better than the bullet had missed me and hit the person I loved most in the world instead? I almost wish it had been me. The way he looked when the elders had explained he was one of the rare Omega males. I don't think I'll ever get his pain off my chest. Our parents tried to help, kept him at home and talked to him, to us, because I couldn't fucking shit about what was happening to him, but I wasn't going to leave him. He was my twin, my other half, and I knew he was afraid. Because Omega males were precious, and that meant they could be worth a lot to a pack, especially a pack like ours that needed so many things. The mountains were a hard place to grow up, even if you had teeth and the agility of a puma on your side. We were okay, but we were never sure we would be okay. Sometimes there wasn't enough prey to go around. Sometimes some of the guys would go down to the towns at the foot of our mountain, and it turned out there was no one hiring big burly men to do their heavy lifting or whatever. I had been meant to go too, now that I was 18 and tall enough to make an impression. But after 7 presented, I couldn't bear to. No one tried to convince me, not even the elders. They were too smart to waste their time with arguments that would lead nowhere. We didn't really talk about it, but I knew Steven was afraid they'd find him an alpha. Except they had to find him an alpha. Omegas needed one. And I was only a beta, sure, but at least I would be by his side to protect him as best as I could.
This has been a recording of Not to be Born, a dark twins story with a happy ending. You can find the story at njlist.com/.